Well, before my next temporal jump, I got a surprise. Remember when I said they didn't find any contaminants? Yeah, well, that turned out to be bullshit. Whatever I had shot left something on my clothes, some sort of residue. Some new people came in just as I was starting my next mission briefing. They didn't even introduce themselves before starting to ask a bunch of questions. I didn't know who they were and didn't talk. I just motioned to the one giving me the briefings, and he had a puzzled look on his face, too. I just got up and said, "Whenever you're ready to continue, call me." One of them stood in front of the door and tried to look intimidating. I seriously wanted to laugh. You can't look intimidating when you're 3 inches shorter and built like a plank of wood. "You're not going anywhere. Sit down," he said to me while looking up into my eyes. I turned and looked at the small group, 5 in total, that had walked into the room. They all were trying to look serious, but failing miserably. I looked at them, then looked back at the one blocking the door. "So are you going to tell me who you are?" He again tried to look hard when I asked that question. I turned a little bit to my right, as though I was going to turn back to the chair, then turned back. "Are you sure?" Then he wasn't trying to look hard. He was just trying hard enough not to piss his pants. The muzzle of my FN-45 was now pressed up against the side of his armpit. The motion I used earlier was a simple distraction so he didn't see me reach for it. I almost never leave the holster unbuttoned, just as a personal preference. And under the armpit is right next to the artery that would not be covered by body armor. Yeah, my trainers in the past were kind of thorough about this sort of thing. I slowly turned around to make sure they all could see that I was just not going to give up information to just old anybody. Only one tried to still act tough. "I read your file. You won't pull the trigger. Now sit your ass down." I cocked the hammer back, and the panic of the short man's face was enough to make them all finally listen. They finally relented and introduced themselves, and I found out that most of them were geneticists. They told me that they had received a small sample of fluid that had gotten on my clothing and turned out to be human. Well, sort of. It was genetically modified blood, though even by today's standards, modification is poorly done. I started to wonder if I was going to lose a hand or grow another finger or something. Who knows, maybe I'll grow an extra never mind. Turns out, when working modifications like this, they need some sort of catalyst. They started naming elements and chemicals that I was hard pressed to keep up with. Though I know most of the elements, many are not listed on the standard periodic table. I'm not a chemist beyond the very basics, of course. Though I got the meaning of what they were saying. The nearest I could figure, genetic alterations had become a relative commonality in the future. This didn't surprise me in the slightest. What did surprise me was the way they said it was being used. It was like human DNA had been randomly spliced with several other animal DNA and RNA strands. This created something very unstable. They pulled up the footage from my cameras I had taken in my last jump. They were able to get some surprisingly good images out of it. At least I thought about that, and then I remembered my GoPro. As it turned out, the figures that were stalking me were basically amalgamations of different parts of human and animal. In one case, it was covered by a slick black fur, and the other seemed to have a carapace. Actually, all of them had partial shells in one way or another. As it turns out, the carapace was strong enough to deflect the bullets I fired at least at distance. Either I hit a point where it was not covered by the shell, or the bullet had been able to punch through at point-blank range. This made me nervous, considering I was scheduled for another jump in the next 2 hours. There was a bright spot in the conversation, though. It turns out that they were able to take all the samples and reverse engineer it. When I asked them if that means they can alter the human genome at will, one of the women gave an emphatic yes. They continued to debrief me for another hour before they realized there wasn't anything else I could give them. I came out of the meeting with a lot of questions. Questions I knew I had to find the answers to, and I wouldn't find them here. Although I would find them when. My jump had not been called off, though I had to wonder what the hell was up with that whole we are badasses routine they were trying to pull. I don't know if they're just trying to get information without giving any, or maybe they wanted to make sure I didn't hold anything back. At this point, I don't even care anymore. All I cared about was getting ready. The look on the armor's face when I was gearing up was interesting. You see, the armor also handles the rest of the gear we take. I was asking him for Kevlar lined clothes. If you don't know what I'm talking about, think those John Wick movies, and you get pretty close. Along with additional 2 magazines for my FN, along with a Taurus Judge loaded with 420. Bullets I got from my FN were custom made for penetration, with the final 2 rounds, of course, being tracers. The cameras were given an extra thick covers, and I asked for extra batteries, just in case. I took my steel-toe boots with me this time, too. Can't be too careful in walking into possible hostile territory. On top of my standard recording gear, I was also given specimen jars, just in case I came across an altered creature. They always wanted a piece of something. I knew what they wanted me to go and harvest as much as I could. This is the type of mission that guys come back from with missing parts. For that reason, I even wore ballistic gloves, eye protection, and even some cover around my neck. With all this on, I got some really strange looks walking into the chamber to jump. The engineers had seen this sort of thing before. They wanted to joke like we normally did before a jump, but they had the look of like watching an inmate walk towards the electric chair. All I could think of was I might come back as like one of those other jumpers. The one where his body slid from the machine, both legs missing and fresh blood squirting out. They never did tell me what got him, but I doubt it was a hamster. By the way, he didn't make it. The actual jump went off without a hitch. It was another 70-year jump. This time I ended up in a well manicured field. It looked like it had been baled like maybe a week prior to get the hay off. This was strange because I jumped in autumn. The fields should be done with harvesting hay like a couple of weeks ago. It was such a nice day, too. This is something that made my internal alarm start screaming. From my experience, the nicer the day, the more chance bad shit can happen. As I walked across the field to the farm, I noticed that it was very well maintained. Solar panels were clean, the windows were open, allowing the curtains to sway in the breeze. As I got closer, I saw an old man on the porch just looking my way. I figured it was my contact's son. He didn't even stir as he watched me approach, and that is when I received the biggest shock. It was my original contact. He was just sat there in the rocking in that chair at the same time he gave me every time I showed up. I was like, what the fuck? Now I felt stupid for bringing so much with me. I walked up and shook his hand, and at least that is what I thought was going to happen. As it turns out, it was a hologram projected from a small device on the chair itself. The rocking motion was automated to give the illusion that someone was home. Well, someone was. I was suddenly face to face with the muzzle of a shotgun. On the other end was a middle-aged woman. At least, I think it was. Something was off, but I couldn't quite figure out what. The features of her face were distorted, almost like her face was clay and someone had come and adjusted things a bit. She demanded to know who I was and why I was in such strange clothes. I couldn't figure out that last one, and I saw that I was wearing cotton-based clothing, and everything she had on was made out of what looked like a cross between spandex and neoprene. I told her who I am and what I was there for. It took her a few seconds to believe me and start lowering the shotgun. She gave a yell, and at least 4 others came out from around the house. To my shock, every single one had been altered. Two of them were changed so much you could almost not tell that they were previously human. A young boy walked on cat paws with cat ears and tail to match. Another older male looked like a horse with big, burly human arms. Another male, I think, could easily be mistaken for a werewolf in the movies. I'm just glad he was wearing pants considering the way he was standing. The youngest was a little girl who also looked green. Not like she was sick, but right between leaf green and pastel green. I'm guessing she wasn't more than 12. I mean, she possibly 10? All I could think of looking at her was this that plant lady from the comics? They invited me in and offered me a glass of water, and I thanked them for it before trying to set up my equipment. It was an interesting conversation for the next few hours. As it turned out, after the solar maximum reached full effect, people started looking for solutions to the problem, anything to limit the amount of food it needed across the planet to survive. Despite the freshly hayed fields, the maximum had decimated crop yields so bad that farmers all over the world became primary targets. And I guess the politicians will blame anyone else before they even think about fixing the problem. While this was going on, one of the super rich tried to hide the fact that they had made themselves genetically altered to keep themselves alive. They claimed that the process was too expensive for the regular person to afford, but thanks to being the information age, it was soon found out that the price was fairly cheap, though there may have been some side effects. For the main lady there, it was distortion of her body. Not much, but she turned out to be the lucky one. You see, it wasn't long before the government, knowing that they would start to lose money if people could make themselves immune to disease, addiction, and, of course, age, made the practice illegal, very much so. So many people that didn't want to starve to death as the food ran out went with the black market. Though, to no one's surprise, they would take large amounts of money to give completely random alterations. She motioned to the horseman and the dogman and mentioned how they didn't choose those forms. Though the horseman isn't starving because he can just eat roughage, the dogman was another story. Though they get by, it was kind of difficult to do so. The only one that seemed to get the right stuff was the little girl. She doesn't need to eat much, and all because her body makes nutrient from the sun like plants. Though she can't handle the cold and all, she is still the healthiest one of them all. It's still an issue. I will admit, I was a little choked up at this point, suddenly finding myself wishing for a stronger drink as I pulled out of my thoughts as the dogman ran through the house barking. As it turns out, the alterations made it impossible for him to talk. I rushed outside with the rest of them, and I could see the horseman trying to fight a mix of strange beasts, creatures, cryptids, I don't know what the hell you want to call them. The woman ran back into the house while the dogman and I ran to help. I almost stopped as the dogman suddenly got on all fours and just charged. I pulled out my pistols as he made contact with the first creature. Now remember that everything has been crossed with human. There were two other dogmen, some bird-looking thing that reminded me of the harpies from the folklore, two lizard-ish men that were in totally different stages of change. Hell, one of them even had a full tail. And four goat people. They all seemed hell-bent on getting into the barn. The horseman was actually holding off to pretty well with those strong appendages. He even kicked one of those goat people hard enough to shatter its skull. The dogman of the house had jumped on another and was trying to rip its throat out. I saw another one come in charging him, and I emptied my FN into it. I don't care how tough the hide is. Tungsten core bullets will make it through. After I hit it, it rolled and cried in pain. The dogman finally succeeded in taking the goatman's head off as I reloaded. I felt something hit my side. Along with that, I felt my ribs break. The armor might be able to stop penetration, but impact is a total nother story. As I rolled to one knee, I realized that my FN had been knocked out of my hand. Thankfully, I still had a good grip on my judge. I had to look to realize one of the goatmen had just rammed me, and hard, too. When that goat thing came again, I put 2 shots into his face. It dropped as I ran. I turned to see one of them had my other pistol and was running to pick up the magazine. Since I was reloading when they struck me, I hadn't seated it yet. I fired again and caught it center mass. It only hesitated for a second before falling back. I looked up and saw that the bird thing was trying to get away, but the horseman had it by its leg or talon foot or whatever the hell you want to call it. It was scratching him pretty bad, and I saw the other 2 goatmen charging in. Then a shot rang out, and the bird dropped. The woman had finally got back outside with a shotgun. I didn't know what load she was using, but she did use both barrels and had to reload. The horseman then struck by the goats and fell to one knee as well. They had hit him in his leg, even though I didn't hear a snap. It was obvious he was in severe pain. I fired the last rounds I had into the goats closest to me. The last one I saw this looked at me scene and said, "Nope," and just got the hell out of there fast on his hooved legs. At this point, the woman had reloaded and fired a shot in the direction of the goat fleeing. She then ran into the horseman to see if he was all right. I reloaded my judge as fast as I could. It's a revolver, so it takes a minute, while retrieving my other pistol. Just as I picked up my 45s, I could hear a scream coming from the house. This was a young girl's scream that made my already adrenaline spiked body go into overdrive. I ran into the house and ran up the stairs, getting into a room as some mostly human male lizard man was trying to hold her down as he was ripping at her clothes. Needless to say, he received the entire magazine to the face. I, however, got blindsided for my trouble. The other lizard man or woman, I can't tell, chomped down onto my shoulders and began tearing into my flesh with its claws. This was short-lived as I heard another shotgun blast. This time, I could feel the pellets impact my back. Thankfully, missing my spine, but it really hurt. The lizard man dropped at that point, straight to the floor. The woman went to comfort the little girl. As she did, she kept reaching into her pockets for more ammo. I pulled out my judge, double-checked to make sure it was loaded, and left it next to her. I went back outside to see what I could do. When I did, I saw the horseman kneeling over the dogman's body, clearly distraught. The bird had torn its neck open, and he had bled out while we were dealing with the others. I'm guessing that was why the horse had not let go, as his wrists were getting tore up by that harpy bird, whatever the fuck it used to be. I didn't say anything at first. Then I told him I would take care of his wounds. Once I had him wrapped up, I told him to go to the house. I followed him into the house, but just to grab my gear. I wasn't gonna through all this shit again, just so they could get their fucking samples. I took the samples I needed, mainly blood, but some small parts do nicely. I took the coat off one of the dead creatures and put it over the face of the dogman. I didn't bother to get a sample from him since I had the other 2 bodies to work with. When I was done, my pack was pretty damn full and heavy, though I didn't finish alone. The horseman came out as I was severing the talon foot of the bird. He turned his head to say, "What the fuck are you doing?" I told him exactly what I was doing and why. He helped a little, but he had to go bury the dogman. I went inside as the sun began to set. I sat down with the woman and gave her all my remaining supplies, food and medical supplies mainly. She was grateful that I was able to help. She began to tell me something she had been hesitant when I arrived. As it turned out, another jumper had been here but had got eaten because he wasn't prepared like I was. When I asked who she went into the other room and returned with a set of dog tags. I winced a little because I recognized the name. It was the guy that had never come back. Come to find out, he jumped at least 7 years before I did. Before my jump back, I was able to talk them into allowing me to take some blood from each of them. I also got a lesson on how bad it had gotten. Through many towns they had continued to survive after being altered. There were many places around the world that condemned the practice, and those that went through it. In many cases, the altered were hunted down or chased out. This caused a lot of roving packs to raid farms and towns for supplies. I wondered, is that what we had just faced? At the height of this conflict, people realized who was actually pulling the strings. The super rich that had kept this technology to themselves were pushing misinformation in order to get the population to kill each other. That way, there's more for them and less for everybody else, because there is no other people. There was no way of hiding from altered humans. Some of the strong enough to pull a blast door off the hinges while others could see in the dark. No matter what technology you tried to pacify the populace with, it didn't matter. You can manufacture electronics all day, but food's another story. I guess technology doesn't stop regardless of what's happening. Before I left, I helped them clean up and found out that the raiding party wasn't interested in the girl at first. It was the bounty in the barn they wanted. All that hay could feed dozens of goatmen, horsemen, or whatever over the entire winter. I felt bad as I reached for my retrieval beacon. My only solace was knowing that this timeline will shift as soon as I go back. At least I hope. As I walked into the field, I started coughing real bad. I didn't think anything of it until I looked at my hand and a bit of blood sprayed across my palm. Great, I had a punctured lung and didn't even realize it. I hit the beacon, and within a moment I was walking off the platform. I could see those 5 geneticists nearly giddy when they saw I had a full bag of parts. I walked up to them, and without stopping, I threw the bag into the closest one's chest, nearly knocking his ass over. I then literally walked through them, pushing the two out of the way as I went to the recovery team for the electronics. I handed everything over to them, but before I handed my chest rig, I looked into the camera and said, "You better have gotten all of that." I said this before putting it on top of the other equipment. As I walked to the door, I opened, and there was El Doctor with a smile on his face, but worry in his eyes. I looked him square in the eye and said, "Just the man I need to see," as I coughed again and more blood sprayed out. As we were about to exit, I stopped and turned to the recovery team. "Oh, there's one more thing, guys." I pulled out the tags from my pocket and handed it to them. One read the name and just gave me the nod. I left to the aid station. Aside from a bunch of debriefs, I was given an entire month off to heal. I was commended during most of my debriefs about calmness under fire and such. I was also asked once if I wished to continue my job. Like I said before, I'm a stubborn guy, so I'll be jumping again soon enough. I just wonder, what the fuck am I gonna see this next time?